Okay, so next I want to talk about labeling and how we communicate stuff. So I should say this, I modified this talk from, I was on the state panel a while ago that was trying to create this California Sustainable Seafood Initiative, which was to try to create a eco-label for seafood sold in California. So this is one of the presentations that was given to our working group, and so I modified many of these slides. Jeez. Okay. We just looked at the auction video. We just heard about. Oh, I should say, are there any other questions about the auction stuff? Make sense? What's going on? Okay. So so we have different quality of stuff. Some folks responsibly harvesting, well-managed fisheries, others not so. So how do you know when you go into the store to buy tuna, let's say, how do you know if it's from the relatively well-managed fishery or they're just taking everything? They're just purse seining and getting whatever the heck they can get. Well, you guys are looking at this now with your seafood surveys, right? That's what you guys are doing. And so you guys are figuring out if you can, as a point of sale consumer, get enough information to tell what the species is, where it was from, how it was harvested. Can you be discriminant and select more responsibly harvested seafood from less responsibly harvested seafood? Because if you can't, then you either throw up your arms and say we can't do anything about it, or you say I'm never going to eat seafood again, or whatever, right? Neither of which are ideal answers. And it's important to say for us, we can choose to say I'm not going to eat seafood. For most of the planet, most of the folks living in most coastal areas of the world, they get the majority of their protein from seafood. So if we're talking about Africa, if we're talking about Indonesia, if we're talking about these types of places, we can switch. Let's have some chicken, let's have some soy or this or that. A lot of these folks cannot. So having well-managed fisheries for us is in a sense a luxury. For most others, it's a necessity. And so I would argue that but that's simply saying I'm never going to eat seafood, that's not going to necessarily solve the problem, right? We'd like to have more clear market signals that drive everyone to more responsible practices. So recognizing this, people have created so-called green labeling or eco-labeling. This can come in two flavors. This can come in the flavor of a guide or in the form of an actual label. A guide would say, hey, if you get your chicken from this state, it's good. A label would actually be a thing that's on the actual package. You guys have been checking this. Has anybody seen any MSC labels yet? Christine? Cool. But was there MSC? Would you see any MSC there?
I think there was.
Okay. So two of you guys saw some MSC at least. Okay, cool. So so we can have those labels or guides. And so WWF years ago realized that this was a problem in the 90s and paired with Unilever. So Unilever is the largest seafood seller in the world. So everything from fish sticks to who the heck knows what. And so WWF got together with these guys and said, hey, look, instead of us suing you or protesting you or whatever, can we figure out a way that's more maybe market-based that we could create something? And they created MSC, which we'll talk about in a second. and we'll talk about that. But so what these guys did was for this presentation for us, they went together again. This is 5 years old now, but they wanted to look at different certification programs for Gesundheit for seafood. And so there's a whole host of these things. MSC is on there. CROV is a European one. There's Dolphin Safe that came from protests in the U.S. A whole variety of these things. So they wanted to say, hey, which of these things are good? How do they compare to one another? And so they used a couple different standards to figure out what would be, what would make a guide or a seal appropriate. So first they used the Fish and Agricultural Organization, which is a part of the UN, their guidelines for marine capture fisheries, best practices. There's a related thing called ISEAL, which is used when people want to set standard for social or environmental standards of any kind, not necessarily seafood. And then WWF had an ecosystem-based approach to dealing with these guys. And what they found was none of these labels met all of these criteria. So nobody was perfect. Everybody had issues with what they were calling sustainable, let's say. There were a couple areas, though, that a lot of these things got right, or at least were on the right track. One was traceability. What do we mean by traceability? Traceability is what I just showed you in the Honolulu fish auction video. So that is, this tuna came from this fish stock. This tuna came from whatever. The water's off of Oahu. And I know the species. I know the guy that caught it, etc. When we have a fillet of something, as you guys know, it's a fillet of something, I don't know, say the size of my cell phone, and it's a fish, I guess. What fish? Oh. If you're a fishmonger, if you've been cutting fish for your life, you maybe can get a sense of possibly what it is, but even those guys couldn't tell you. They couldn't tell you, is this a big eye? Let's say they say, well, it looks like a tuna. Is it a big eye tuna? Right? Is it a bluefin? Who knows? So traceability helps with that. Traceability allows us to, as it goes from a whole fish, or a live fish, to a dead whole fish, to a cut up fish, to something in a prepared dish like ceviche, we should still be able to trace back to where that fish product came from. That's traceability. And how we go about saying that, yes, indeed, this thing did come from that place, that's the accreditation or the certificate system. Areas where most of these labeling approaches were weak is the fishery actually well managed? Because most of our fisheries are what we call data poor or data deficient fisheries. Meaning we would like to know how many babies are there, what size to sexual maturity, all that kind of stuff. And in many cases, we just don't know for these global fisheries. And so therefore, it makes it hard to say, well, are we doing it right? Right? And if we don't know all the biology and we don't know all the true exploitation pressure, it's hard to know. And so it's hard to say if these things are sustainably harvested or not, many of these things. The other is, how is the fishery managed? If it's in the US, it's pretty easy for us to know. Or the EU, it's pretty easy for us to know. But if it's in a place like China, good luck, man. China notoriously lies. So much so that now when you see the global data, you will see global fish landings and global fish landings without China. Because it's gotten so incredibly, ridiculously bad. just lie upon lie upon lie upon lie. And so you can't trust their data. So how if we can't trust the data, how do we know how many fish they're harvesting, etc.? And there's a lot of differences here between things. So in general, now this isn't too surprising because the WWF was the thing that contracted these guys, but I still think this is pretty fair, which is that MSC, which stands for the Marine Stewardship Council, came out highest among this group of eco labels these guys were looking at. Okay, so in addition to just our ecological, trying to get the information on the ecological aspects of fishing and the impact of fishing, we also need to realize that there's a lot of social issues going on here as well. So our friends, for example, at Santa Monica Seafood, that supplies the largest seafood wholesaler here in Southern California, they work hard to develop relationships with local fishers and trusted local fishermen and this and that. And part of that is they want to be assured of quality, but part of that is also they want to be, they want to have responsible partners out there. Not everybody is concerned about the fishermen. Okay, so let's talk about what MSC is. So MSC was birthed by this discussion between WWF and Unilever, like I said. So they got together and they said, is there a way we can do this differently so we don't protest you or sue you and no. So they got together. And so this for-profit entity and this NGO got together and they talked for a while. And they realized they shared a similar goal. So sometimes people talk about, so recently Walmart has made some announcements about sustainability.
In the Monterey Bay book that I got from the conference, they were like one of the top people that was one of the good places to fish, to buy seafood.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I was like, whoa.
Right.
Okay.
So what I think is important to realize is while not everybody agrees with this, maybe, over-harvesting is bad for business in the long term, right? Maybe not in the short term, but in the long term. If you are a large-scale entity, like, let's say, a Walmart or a Costco or something like that, you're not just selling in Southern California. You're not just selling to your local customers. You're selling to customers across the nation or maybe even the world. So you plan well ahead, right? We're approaching Christmas season. Nobody put in an order for a Christmas toy last week, right? The Christmas orders went in who knows, May or whatever for their toys and their PlayStations and that kind of stuff, right? These guys have long time windows. So if we're, getting to a situation like the Atlantic cod was, where all of a sudden, boom, it just all goes away over a very short period of time, that means we won't have cod on our store shelves, right? So there's an economic incentive for these folks that want a constant supply, a consistent supply of these items. They maybe have an interest in making sure that we don't take too much in any one year, so that we have this continuous supply, right? At least in theory, that should apply. And so that's why Unilever was in it, right? Unilever wanted to make sure that they had constant, fish for their fish sticks, for example. WWF was interested in conserving this part of the ocean, right? And so everyone agrees the goal was to reverse the decline in global fish stocks, make things stable, if not recovering and improve these fish stocks. And so they used, as their starting point, the FAO's Code of Conduct for responsible fishing. They currently are operating out of 8 global offices with the headquarters in London, the global headquarters in London, I believe. And initially, this was just funded by WWF and Unilever, and they created this thing. They created this thing to be independent. So this entity they created, this MSC framework, is not run by WWF, is not run by Unilever. For the first few years, they worked on getting up and running. But then as of 1997, it's its own independent thing. So even though its roots were in these two groups, it is not beholden to them. It's autonomous. The analogy is we wanted to create a global accountant for fisheries. Now, obviously, accountants can be slimy and evil and horrible just like anybody else can be, right? Our most recent fiscal crisis is maybe evidence of the fact that not all accountants were verifying mortgages and things the way they should be, but in general, accountants are neutral. They're supposed to be neutral, right? They don't care if you go bankrupt. They don't care if you make $1 million. They're supposed to just look at the facts and tell you, how your business is doing, let's say. And so that was the idea here. Create an accountant to assess our seafood. So initially it was grant funded, but the idea was it was to transition into its own autonomous thing, meaning whatever money it needs for operating expenses, it has to generate itself. It's primarily interested in documenting fishing practices and the traceability of any fish products that come from a given fishery. So MSC provides the standard that defines how a fishery could be certified or not. It's important to say this is voluntary. This is not industry. This is not government. Okay? It's not first party, which is the business. It's not second party, which is the regulator. It is so-called third party, or third party certification. We've seen similar things in recent years with FSC, which does the same for forestry. Similar things with coffee, chocolate, other commodities like that. So it provides a third-party standard to guarantee something is sustainably harvested according to their definition of sustainability. It creates this so-called chain of custody via this traceability. So even though it was a fish caught by this fisherman that was then bought by this wholesaler that then sold it to the fish stick company that then cooked it and breaded it and sent it out to whatever, you can still follow where that thing comes from. And this costs some money, right? It's voluntary, right? No one has to do this. It's not a government requirement. But if you go through the process, you can slap this logo on your seafood, and we'll see when we look at our data in a week or so that you guys are collecting now. But the idea is you can charge more for this, right? Maybe 30 cents a pound or whatever, with the idea being that that's how you can recoup your money. So the companies are going to pay to have themselves certified. They're going to pay for the service to be evaluated. I shouldn't say that. They're going to pay to be evaluated, not necessarily certified. So it's costing them some money. So what do they get out of it? They get out of it this trademarked logo that you as a buyer, if you're not sure what to buy, I can use this and I have a higher confidence in this particular product than some unlabeled product that it's relatively sustainably harvested. So how this actually works is MSC is the sort of gatekeeper, but you actually contract. You don't contract with MSC, you contract with individual consulting firms that they are accredited through MSC and they follow MSC standards, but MSC just provides the framework. So these consulting firms that you guys could go work for now, for example, would do the actual going to the plant, go to the ship, check out stuff. So as we already covered, we said the current process was developed a little bit over time based on the FAO standards. Talked to a lot of stakeholders. It's an independent, accredited, third-party certification. It only focuses on wild caught fisheries. They're currently working on a mariculture, aquaculture certification, but the initial inception, what we have now, is only applies to wild caught stuff. So if you see an MSC logo on it, it's not a farmed product. It's supposed to be objective, it's supposed to be scientifically verifiable, it's supposed to be rigorous and comprehensive. Having said that, in theory, it's open to anyone. It's open to the little small scale fishers. It's open to the big industrial guys. It doesn't matter who or where you are, as long as you want to be subjected to these standards, we'll go and evaluate you. Again, it's voluntary, no one has to do it. How it starts with an initial confidential pre-assessment that no one else sees. So you bring someone in, they do a really quick and dirty look, and they say, well, you're probably not going to make it through certification because you're using, I don't know, bottom trawling in this sensitive habitat. That's probably not going to make it. Or whatever, right? So they do some very broad thing, and then if it works, it's great. Then you will pay to go through a full assessment. And so the full assessment, those reports will be provided, right? And so pretty much nobody goes through it, or very few people go through a full review unless they're pretty confident they're going to get the certification. If you get certified, you get to use that logo for 5 years. There's a couple caveats. So basically for 5 years. At the end of 5 years, even if you've done this whole thing, you have to go through a reassessment. That's not as costly as the initial assessment, but it's definitely costly. You have to do, submit these annual audits or be willing to be audited annually, but that's just sort of a spot check kind of thing. That's not a full-blown everything. That's just Gesundheit to see if things are going the way they're supposed to be going. And they set in place a process where folks that might not be ideal, but they're on a trajectory of getting better, those folks can get certified, right? It's a point system thing. And so depending on how the points are accumulated, you can get enough points that you would get certified. But if you had some things you need to be improved, the notion is you have to improve these over time. And so your next assessment, you might be held to a higher standard, right? In the pre-assessment, that first stage, they're going to make some recommendation about whether you should go forward or not. If you're not going to go forward, here are some things you probably need to work on, and then call us again. Again, they're confidential. These aren't a public document. This is a private transaction between this essentially accountant and this fisherman or fishing processor, fish processor. It takes on the order of 2 to 3 months, and it'll vary in price, but it's relatively cheap compared to the full assessment. The full process might take up to a year and a half. One of the biggest knocks on this, on MSCs, it's very, very expensive, and it takes a long time to get it. So it acts as a disincentive for smaller fisheries, more smaller scale fisheries. Yeah, right. Now, you can also define what's being assessed. You could do the entire fishery. You could do all the lobsters on the West Coast, let's say. Or you could do the Channel Islands lobsters, or the Bay of Los Angeles in Baja. Just those. So you can pick the unit of assessment. As I said before, you get scored, and you have to have at least 80 an average across these three different principles, which are ecosystem, sustainability, blah blah blah, management system. They have to have an average of 60, but no individual indicator can have a score of less than 60. So that's how I said before, how we could have a measure that you might get certified, and somebody might look at this and go, how can this be certified? This guy does X, and well, the other things were being done relatively well, and this person has a goal to bring that 60% up to 80%, over the next 5 years or something like that. And so the conditions are areas that we expect to see improvement on. So the three domains of the key three principles are the overall sustainability of the resource, the potential impact on the ecosystem that this practice has. It could be bycatch, it could be by habitat modification, by a trawl, whatever. And then 3, it has some effective management system. Ideally governmental, but if not, the business has or something. So the first principle is that this fishing should not allow overexploitation, overfishing. Second principle is that we should preserve the structure, productivity, and function of the ecosystem. And the third is that we should have an effective management system that is comprised of laws and other policies to assure that we don't overexploit. And so, for example, this is what I was just showing you. We have 31 indicators. Each one of the indicators has to have a score of at least 60. And then each of those 31 measures are divided up into one of these 3 principles. Each of those principles has to have an average score of 80% or higher. After they get certified, again, they have to have these annual update things. And if they were told they had to make progress, they had to demonstrate they were at least working on improving, say, this one score that was a 70 to take it up to an 80 or 90.
Do they have to pay for the reassessment?
Yes.
So they could get it once and then be like, okay.
They can get it once, and then you're saying they could do it once and then just do whatever they want? I suppose in theory, but they can only do that for 5 years. So that's why it's only 5 years and not 25 years or something. But if you imagine the initial one takes, a year and a half probably, if not longer, to get done. So you're kind of investing a lot of time. So that helps as well as it act as a deferment. So this is an effort to use market forces. So third-party certifications are ways of not passing a law saying you have to do this, trying to provide an economic incentive to do what we believe is the right thing. And so these guys, in the case of this third-party certification, they're making an ecological and a business case. And so this provides a way for you to signal to the fishermen that you believe in sustainably harvested stuff, right? If you pay with your wallet that you'll pay for the slightly maybe more expensive item, then that gives incentive for people to go through the process and do a little bit more, etc. There's been a lot of criticism of MSC. There's a lot of people that say this doesn't work. They only have a handful of fisheries certified compared to the thousands of fisheries that are out there across the planet. Those are all, I think, valid critiques. Here's a few examples, though, of how this has worked relatively well, we could say, in some cases. So one of the most popular things you'll see if you get fish sticks or processed food would be hoki, this New Zealand fish. The stock has been rebuilding since they were first certified. By taking some different actions, they've reduced seaboard mortality based on the long line they do to get the fish. They've reduced their seabed impacts. Similarly with South African hake, which is like a big sardine or mackerel kind of thing. They've also reduced their bird mortality. Patagonian toothfish, very controversial. The real name is Patagonian toothfish. You'll see this as Chilean sea bass, which is a marketing name. And these guys have traceability is, I think, the main thing you can say about that. The other thing is a bit questionable these days. So a lot of people, so the certifying this very slow growing fish that's massively over harvested around the world, folks are saying that, hey, the fact that MSC certified these guys means they're total BS. Yeah, I'll just say that. Okay, so, and then in terms of economics, with Pacific cod, it's allowed new markets to open up, and it's allowed to the fisheries to get higher landings. Same with Pacific albacore, new markets, and increase the price per pound at the dock. If we talk, so this is when this is another thing that MSC loves to trump out, which is the first smaller scale artisanal fishery, which is this California rock lobster one in Baja. They claim this is great. This is a little fishing collective, and these guys are able to make way more money now. They can sell their product as MSC. I'll just note that's one example, and not necessarily representative of the rest of the stuff they've certified. Similarly, bird bycatch in South Africa, and and new policy developed for herring. Okay, so a key part of MSC is this traceability thing. So what you're supposed to be able to see is here's this MSC label. It's copyrighted. That means no one can forge it. You're supposed to see something like this. A couple letters, a dash, another letter, and then a dash and a couple numbers and/or numbers and letter. The idea is supposed to be you can take your smartphone out and you can go www.msc.org and go search SF-C-2151 return, and it should go query the database and tell you all the different stops that fish has made. It was caught by this fisherman in this port. It was processed by this guy in this state, and then it was sold by this market chain in this place. Has anybody seen those numbers? So Aspen, did you say you saw some MSC?
I think it was like the big signs.
Okay. So Christine,
I didn't see the tracking number.
So that's been a thing that's I've noticed in the last couple of years. So they've been having these seals, and then the seal is there. It's not legal if you just have a seal. I mean, you can have a seal up to advertise it, like maybe on the shelf or something, But on the actual product, it's supposed to have the number. That is the traceability. Several times in recent years when I've tried to type in these numbers, it doesn't come up. So did someone lie and put that number on, or is it the database is not being maintained as quickly or whatever? It's probably more likely the second, but nevertheless, if it's not traceable, it's not traceable. We've seen various commitments that have come out from different groups to buy only and sell only MSC seafood. So Walmart is committed to sourcing, or originally committed to sourcing 100% of their seafood from MSC certified sources by 2011. They didn't make it. Home Depot made a similar claim with FSC certified wood, same kind of idea, third-party wood certification. It didn't come close to meeting their standard, and that was many years ago. So it's good to have these goals and work towards them. In practice, it's very hard. Since only a small fraction of our seafood is MSC certified, it's hard to meet these standards. But more and more places every year, more and more products every year, etc. So another approach is like the Monterey Bay Seafood Watch, which is not an eco label, it's a guide. And so most of them follow this common pattern, which comes from stoplights, which is where people get it from. Red means stop, green means go, yellow means go slow. Or go very, very fast. Red is stop, green is go, yellow is go fast. So the idea here is, okay, not everything has a label. Let's just try to use some general assumptions about how this product was harvested, where it's from and how it was harvested, to make some quick guidelines, right? Because not everybody's going to be able to go and read 14 papers on the sustainability of Baja lobster, right? So the idea is, if it's a green thing, go ahead and order it or buy it. If it's a red thing, do not ever buy it. If it's a yellow thing, if you have to, right? It's not as good as green, but it's better than red. So if we take the example from Whole Foods, anybody surveyed at Whole Foods yet? Maybe Michaela or somebody's not here. So I just use them as one example. So they've committed to sell as much MSC certified as possible, and avoid things that are on the MSC red list. Yeah. And they try to do as much farm stuff as possible. So for example, these are things Whole Foods does not sell. Chilean sea bass, orange roughy, so Chilean sea bass, orange roughy, these are great names for horrible sounding fish, common names, that now we need to eat these because we've taken the nicer looking whatever fish. And so these are marketing terms. So a lot of the issue we have, just almost all this stuff is it's really hard to figure out what the species actually is. What is that, snapper? Snapper. What species is snapper? From the ocean? Really? So the common names are really particularly problematic in our seafood stores. So anyway, so that we see all these commitments coming from folks, and not only from actual retailers, but also people like Sodexo that does our food service on campus. Commitments from those folks. You'll see this on restaurants. In some restaurants, has anybody seen any MSC in restaurants that they've checked out? Yeah, it'll be very few. Again, because it's hard to get a consistent supply of MSC product. But when it is, you'll see it like this. You'll see it usually highlighted. It's so rare when you see it, it's probably going to be on the table, a little placard on the table, and on the menu. In theory, the benefits of certification are improved management of the resource, recognition that we do need stuff. So the very fact that you guys are going in, even if you're finding there's no sustainable seafood or whatever at these places, the fact you guys are asking, hey, do you guys serve MSC, or do you guys, where's your stuff come from? That's going to make the waiter or waitress kind of go, huh? Let me go check that up, right? So by the very fact that we ask about this stuff, it helps push the awareness and increases the probability we'll have more sustainable stuff in the future. Again, as I said before, that one of the benefits is these guys get, they can charge a lot of money for their item, and the supplier can have increased confidence that this product is not going to go away next year because the population is going to crash, and potentially opens new markets for products.